have an announcement. The car is license plate 4570BJ has to move. Okay. You bring in the car key.
Oh, okay. Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantir Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvasatbuddhimapnotu, sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing the Grace Divine on the very last page in your book.
Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is grace versus self-effort. I would like to begin by referring to the book by Swami Tyagananda. He wrote a definitive biography of Sri Ramakrishna. The great strength of that biography, in Bengali it's called the Ramakrishna Leela Prasanga. Its English translation it's called Ramakrishna the Great Master. And a few years ago, a newer translation of that book came by Swami Tyagananda called Ramakrishna and His Divine Life. The great strength of that book is it's written by someone who was a direct disciple of Ramakrishna, who lived, moved with him. So a lot of what he writes, and as he says in, I believe in the introduction of the book, that he has recorded in that book only what he has verified on his own. So it's not a speculative biography. So in that book, in one place, this is what he says. Swami Vivekananda once said to a friend, "Basketful of philosophical books can be written on each single sentence spoken by the master." Even making some provision for hyperbole, sometime that can occur when we speak about a saintly person. This is still a very profound statement to make. So the friend was surprised to hear it and said, "Is that so? We, however, do not find so deep a meaning in his words." Clearly, I mean, there are some teachings of it which strike to any of us as profound. But there are many other sayings which seem so simple and straightforward, almost commonsensical, that sometimes we might think that, well, I got it, I understood it. And this may sound odd, sometimes the utter simplicity of these teachings may lull us into thinking that we have understood everything that teaching was meant to offer us. We find that kind of simplicity, in some sense a deceptive simplicity, I might say it, in the parables and stories that Jesus told or Buddha told, say Ramakrishna, and all these the greatest among these saints, they always spoke in a very direct, simple language. Only those that came after them, they then create a philosophy out of it, a conceptual framework out of it. And sometimes the commentary becomes more difficult than the original text. There is a story told about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, a great saint, who was also a great scholar, that when he once studied under a great scholar, I think that scholar was trying to teach him Brahma Sutras, one of the foundational texts of Vedanta. And 3 days the scholar expounded the first few sutras, and Chaitanya just sat there just blank, with a blank look on his face. And that can be very disconcerting to a teacher when a student just sits there with no reaction on his face. And so after 3 days, Chaitanya, the teacher asked him, "Are you even following what I am saying?" And then Chaitanya looked at him and with great humility, you didn't mean to be sarcastic, but you just telling this, just what he felt. He said, "Well, I'm able to follow the text, but it's commentary that I'm not able to follow." So sometimes, that's why I said, sometimes the very simplicity of the original teaching can lull us into thinking that we have understood it. So in any case, this friend was very surprised when he heard Vivekananda say that basket full of philosophical books can be written on each single sentence spoken by the master. By master he meant Ramakrishna. So, so the friend said, "Will you please explain to me any of his utterances in that manner? The deepest import of Ramakrishna's teaching. Give me an example." To which Swamiji said, because the friend had said, "Well, I'm not able to find the deep meaning into it." Swami Vivekananda said, "Well, you would have understood it had you the brains." Very typical of the kind of response you can expect from Swami Vivekananda. And then he asks his friend, he says, "Well, take any saying of the master and I will explain." The friend then asked him to explain the story of the elephant god and the Mahout god. Let me take a pause a little bit. So many of us are familiar with that story, but I will narrate to you what that story is for those of you, or to just refresh your memory. So Ramakrishna often referred to this story many times in the course of his conversation. You find it appearing several times in that big book, The Gospel of Ramakrishna. And the story briefly goes like this. So here is this one person who why don't I just read that story? That'll be even better. Can you just get me a copy of the Gospel of Ramakrishna from the bookstore? Because I think it'll be good to, rather than me narrating it to you from memory, to read the exact words as of Ramakrishna himself. So what Vivekananda was saying was that the friend said, "Okay, here is this story. Now tell me what the import of that story is." So I'll just wait for the book until it comes. Thank you. Okay. So it comes in many places, but I'm reading the version that comes on page 84 of the book. So these are Sri Ramakrishna's words. He said, "Let me tell you a story. In a forest, there lived a holy man who had many disciples. One day, he taught them to see God in all beings, and knowing this, to bow low before them all. A disciple went to the forest to gather wood for the sacrificial fire. Suddenly, he heard an outcry, 'Get out of the way, a mad elephant is coming.' All but the disciple of the holy man took to their heels. He reasoned that the elephant was also God in another form. Then why should he run away from it? He stood still, bowed before the animal, and began to sing its praises. The Mahout of the elephant," the person who sits atop the elephant and the caretaker, "the Mahout of the elephant was shouting, 'Run away, run away!' But the disciple did not move. The animal seized him with its trunk, cast him on one side, and went on its way. Hurt and bruised, the disciple lay unconscious on the ground. Hearing what had happened, his teacher and his brother disciples came to him and carried him to the hermitage. With the help of some medicine, he soon regained consciousness. Someone asked him, 'You knew the elephant was coming. Why didn't you leave the place?' The student said, 'But our teacher has told us that God himself has taken all these forms of animals as well as men. Therefore, thinking it was only the elephant god that was coming, I did not run away.' At this, the teacher said, 'Yes, my child, that is true, that the elephant god was coming, but the Mahout god forbade you to stay there. Since all are manifestations of God, why didn't you trust the Mahout's words? You should have heeded the words of the Mahout god.'" So this story many of us have read. Now, it was this story that this friend of Vivekananda said, okay, if you think basket full of words can be written on every teaching, tell us about this story. What meaning can come, or what do we understand from this story? And then we continue in that book by Swami Tyagananda. In his explanation, Swamiji, the book says, at once took up the controversy over the doctrine of free will and of predestination, of personal effort and God's will, ranging perpetually among the scholars of both the East and the West, without approaching any conclusion. Swamiji continued for 3 days to explain to the friend in simple language that this story by the master was a wonderful solution to that controversy, the debate between God's will and self-effort, or the debate between free will and predestination, a more or less different way you can mention what that controversy is. Now, unfortunately, this interesting as this bit of from the book is, he doesn't tell us afterwards. Well, it was narrated by this didn't happen with Swami Tyagananda. It happened to another friend of Vivekananda, I think his name was Haramohan Mitra. So this is all that the friend said. But 3 days, like, what was the discussion that went along with it? So, and oftentimes many of us in the monastery, especially when we were novices, we used to just figure out, like, what are the things Swamiji might have said just about this story? And since we don't know, it gives us a chance to reflect on this story ourselves. So I would invite all of you to think in your mind. You know the story of what does this story say to you? What message does this story bring to you? So I will just share a few of the thoughts that come to my mind. It's not my intention to say, like, this is exactly what Swamiji said, because I wasn't present there, so I don't know what Swami Vivekananda said. But these are the kind of thoughts that come. And then later on, maybe later on as we sit there after the satsang, feel free to share your thoughts about the story there. So the way I frame this, the questions or the doubts that come about the story in this way. Now, whatever happened in this story, so this person going out, refusing to move when the elephant came, and then getting hurt by the elephant. What did all this happen because the person exercised his free will, or was it due to that person's effort, or it was something that was just meant to be that way? Was it God's will that it should happen the way it did? Was this predestined to happen this way? Was there any way the story could have been changed? Was the outcome of the story open to change, or was it fixed? I think it might be helpful to look at this story from different perspectives. Because, well, this didn't happen to any of us. This happened to some person. And so we are just observers. We are just neutral observers trying to figure out what happened. But I think, what about the people involved in that story? Well, at least we know 2 people who are directly involved in that story. One was this person who was standing in the way of the elephant. And the other, since everything happens through God's will, God was present there also. So let us look at it from the perspective of this student and the perspective of God. Only God knows what God's perspective is, and only that student knew what his perspective was. Again, we are just trying to imagine, trying to speculate what may have happened. Now, from the student's perspective, clearly this person used his will, because we read in the story, he just thought to himself, well, our teacher said God is present in everyone. Therefore, God is present in the elephant as well. And so he used his will, he applied his understanding of what he had learned from his teacher, and then faced the music. So, and then clearly it might seem natural that after this person was hurt and then later cared for by his teacher and his friends, what might have been the thoughts that went through this student's mind as he was being bandaged and just aching with pain all over? The first thing must have been, what an idiot I am. I should have moved out of the way like everyone did. So there's this regret, a feeling of maybe guilt that how come my other friends understood what to do and how come I didn't understand? Maybe I should have paid better attention when the master was when I was being taught this lesson. I probably wasn't paying attention. That's why I didn't understand the teaching well. And then, of course, also hopefully, a lesson that is learned. Next time something happens like this, I'll try to be wiser. I won't make the same mistake again. So these are the kind of reactions we can expect in someone who has had a bad experience, a feeling of regret, possibly a feeling of guilt, possibly a thing that, well, if only, and we see that happening in our lives as well. Thing like, oh, if only I had done it, then the things might have been different. So we can imagine superimposing what generally goes on in our minds on this student's mind, considering to be an average human being like you and me, that this is what that student might have thought. Now, what would be God's perspective? Well, who really knows, as I said, how God saw all this? Again, if we could speculate what the student thought, we also have the freedom to speculate how God may have seen this. Wasn't there a movie some years ago which said, like, if any of us were to be in a God's position or something like that? I just kind of read a review of it. It seemed to be a nice idea. And we can, again, it's a very outrageous, it might seem, but not so outrageous from a Vedantic perspective. If you are, any of us were God, how would we have seen this incident? And well, from a God's perspective, it may be like, well, everything happens by my will. The whole universe won't exist even for a moment if I didn't will it. And so God might say, well, this experience was necessary for this student in this student's education and growth, and this was how it was meant to be. And this is how evolution occurred. This is how people learn, through mistakes, through failure. So this is how it was meant to be. So these are the two perspectives. A third perspective would be the rest of us, because how would we see it? And we see it is with just doubts and questions. What is really happening? So we have these doubts, while these two people directly involved in the story have got their own, because they were directly involved into it. And I feel that as long as we are looking at this story as from outside, we won't be able to arrive at any satisfactory conclusion. We just have to say, from this person's perspective, this version, that version. But what if we put ourselves in the story? Then things begin to be different. So instead of now saying, if I were God, what if I was that student who stood in the way and who was hurt by the elephant? How would I see it? And really, we don't even need to limit it only to this particular instance. Really, everything that happens in our life, we can ask a similar question. That whatever has happened in our life so far, big things and small things, pleasant things and unpleasant things, were all those things meant to be the way they happened? Or did I play any role in it? In other words, could I have changed the course of my life? When Swami Vivekananda says, you are the creator of your own destiny, your future is in your own hands, it does make us feel that I can change the outcome of what will happen with my life. And so therefore, we can ask that question ourselves. It seems to me that as long as we have the awareness that I am doing things, I am making choices in life, I am taking decisions of my life, we will never be able to get rid of this conviction that I can change things around. In fact, all of the social reform or even personal reform that we kind of actions that we do to improve things around us or within us is based on the conviction I can change things. So without that conviction, we wouldn't be able to do it, which is why many of us have heard and learnt, and it makes sense when it is said, God helps those who help themselves. So we have to be up and doing, do the right thing, because we know there is such a thing as, in the larger picture, such a thing as a justice. If I do something right, something good, something positive will come out of it. If I do something stupid, if I do something wrong, something not very positive will come out of it. So therefore, we are right in thinking that I can change the course of things around me. What Vedanta's teachers have said, that if I continue doing what is right, if I continue doing what is good, with a spiritual outlook, by spiritual outlook mean doing it as a yoga, no matter which yoga we apply, doing it with the insights we learn from the karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, raj yoga, anything, any spiritual practice, that I don't just do things the way people do, just instinctively, just driven by their the demands of the body and mind, just being pushed around by their ambitions or by the expectations of people around us. That if we do things consciously with some ultimate goal in view, especially the spiritual goal in view, then eventually things might begin to look a bit different. They already look a bit different even in our present way. It's like the kind of world we see and understand and interpret when we are little children. We do probably very little of it at that age. But as teenagers, our understanding of the world, interpretation of our experiences is of one kind. Then as we go in our 20s and 30s, when we gather more experiences and hopefully a little bit more maturity, we begin to see the world a little bit more differently than how a teenager would. And then later on, when we are in our 40s and 50s, this is all assuming that we are learning from our experiences, then the world will continue to look a bit different. And therefore, that is why, how is it we speak about a generation gap? How is it sometimes that our grandparents seem to react and interpret things in a different way than we do? Well, when they were our age, they probably thought the same way we did. But things have changed due to age, and things have changed. Now, in the case of spiritual seekers, things change even more radically. So while things may change in a gradual course of a life, things change more radically if we are conscious spiritual seekers. And they change radically in the case of Vedanta students, for instance, because our notion of the I itself changes. So when I say, I'm doing this, I make the decision, I choose. If my understanding of I changes, then my interpretation of the choices made, the decisions that occur, the actions that are performed is going to change. Gradually, or fast, it can vary from person to person, this change in my perception of I can take different forms. In the language, in theistic language, a language of bhakti, a language of devotion, we might say something similar to the often quoted words of Ramakrishna when he said, "I'm a machine, you are the operator." So oftentimes he, in his prayer, when he would pray to the Divine Mother, he would say, "You are the one who do everything. I'm only an instrument." And sometimes the word that gets used is, "I'm a machine, you are the operator." That because Ramakrishna lived in a pre-auto industry era. He didn't say, "I'm a car, you're a driver." He said, "I'm a chariot, and you are the one driving the chariot." So the evolution that had occurred in his life changed his perspective of I. We don't know exactly how young Ramakrishna, well, when he was a little boy, Gadadhar, maybe he just thought like all young children do, "I'm doing this." And he was quite a naughty, mischievous kid, as we have read about Ramakrishna's childhood. But then we see, after that full light of his enlightenment, the same little naughty child of that village, Kamarpukur, then was saying, "Everything happens through God's will, and I'm only an instrument." So his I had undergone a change. Or more philosophically, if you want to look at it in a more abstract sense, we can see what Krishna taught in the Gita when he said that there is a verse which goes like this: "Guna guneshu vartante iti matva na sajjate," that all activities in this world are only material particles interacting with one another. Well, I am the spirit, just the detached witness of everything that happens. And the example that I often give is even an act like reading a book. And if you just look at it in a philosophical sense, well, this is a material object. These are all, again, a material entity, this body. So these material objects and the act of perception going to the eyes, the brain, and the intellect, all of these things are material. So material particles interacting with material particles, and then my appropriating that material activity as mine and saying, "I'm the one reading," that's a problem. So one who is able to recognize that is then able to say, "Well, I'm not really doing anything. All activity belongs to the body and mind. I'm neither the body nor the mind." That the Nirvana Shatkam that we often sing here, that's the primary message. That all of these parts of my personality, the body, mind, ego, none of these things are really me. I am just that pure consciousness. So whether we look at ourselves as just an instrument in the hands of God, or we look at ourselves as the spirit completely detached from all material things and all activity belongs to matter, we then recognize that I don't do anything. So it's a big change. It's a big change from beginning to see that I'm the creator of my destiny. I can change things around, that I make my choices, I take decisions, I do things, to then say, I don't do anything. Things happen. It is then, when we reach that state, that there's another one, a very well-known verse in the Gita, when Krishna says, when we reach that state, when our I undergoes that radical transformation, and we recognize that I don't do anything, then things happen, and the way I will see how they happen will be very different than when I saw them with the idea that I was doing things. That is where this Krishna says, to such people whose I has completely gone, in whom only God's I functions, it's then God who takes care of everything. God preserves what they have and brings to them what they lack. The word in Sanskrit is called Yoga Kshema. And we see that in Ramakrishna's life, we see very dramatic ways in several instances, that whenever he was in need of something, things automatically came to him. He didn't even have to will it. That's because the I had gone, this little will, my will, had completely gone out of the way. So it was only the divine will that worked through them. So once that I undergoes a transformation in our lives, and in the lives of all spiritual seekers, sooner or later it will. Sometimes it might be a very gradual change. Maybe so gradual we may ourselves may not be aware of it. But over time, we will notice how we see ourselves now and how we saw ourselves maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago might have been very different. And if we continue with our spiritual practice with sincerity, with faith, with regularity, this sense of I will keep on changing. And by changing, I mean, well, it can change for the worse or for the better. So if we follow this spiritual life the way we should, this change will be for better. And by better, I mean, I will be going closer and closer to truly who I am. So from a distorted understanding of I, we will go to the real, genuine understanding of that I. And then, no matter what happens in my life, whether it is wonderful or not, whether it is hurtful or whatever happens in my life, I will then say, I won't blame myself, I won't blame anyone. There will be the blaming game will be absent. I will just see that this is how it was meant to be. And Ramakrishna narrated this through another one incident. In Bengali, it's called Rame Richa. Everything happens by the will of Rama. And he narrates the story about a devotee of Rama, how everything that happened in his life, he said it was Rama's will. Now, many of us do the same thing, but not with everything that happens in our life. So we are very selective in these matters. So sometimes when there are not any big stakes involved, and especially if no one is going to blame us, it's a little bit easy to say, well, everything is the mother's will. It's all what Ramakrishna meant it to be. It's rather easy to say that, and we say that very glibly. But it's not so easy to say that when we feel that, oh, I could have, if only I could have done things differently, it wouldn't have happened. And therefore, to be consistent with that idea that everything happens through God's will, I think it would be better, this is my personal opinion, is to not say so frequently that everything happens through God's will. Perhaps it might be good to say it just as a kind of a self-reminder, but we're not really being very sincere when we say everything happens through God's will, when most of the things we do it through our own will. And so the story that Ramakrishna told about that Rama's will was, even though this person was wrongly blamed for some crime, was wrongly taken by the cops, was put inside the prison, he never for once protested. He just said, well, this is how it was meant to be. It was all Rama's will. Then, of course, the mistake was recognized. He was released from it. They apologized to him. He said, well, this is Rama's will too. So, it's true that everything happens through God's will. But in order to hold on to that teaching, we will have to be consistent with it all through. We can't selectively apply that. So to summarize very briefly, our interpretation of the experiences we have in our life, because things happen, you see, the basic, I look at it this way, the basic template of a human life is not different. And you can include in that the life of a saint as well as a sinner. You can take the life of these greatest of saints, even those whom we see as prophets, incarnations, and so on, and to an ignorant person. The basic template, and I really mean basic, is not really different. Because there are some good things happening, there are some bad things happening, there are some there are some joys, there are some sorrows, there are some betrayals. It happens in the life of greatest amongst us. But where the difference is how they view it, how they react to it. If you look at the lives of some of these great saints, it wasn't all just glory. It wasn't just everything roses, roses all the way. In fact, in the lives of many saints and mystics, you'll find there is so much struggle, so much hardship, so much suffering, or at least what appears to us as suffering. Now, how they saw it, how they interpreted it, that's, I think, what makes a difference between an enlightened person and unenlightened person. Same things could happen in the lives of two of them, but how an enlightened being interprets that experience and sees that experience, and how an unenlightened being sees, that would be the difference. Or let me put it the other way. Depending on how we react to the experiences in our lives, we will know whether we are enlightened or not. If any time we have a doubt, have I been already enlightened or not? All that we need to do is, whatever happens in my life, how do I see it? Do I feel God is doing everything, or do I feel I am doing it? How often is my heart filled with regret, guilt, anger? How often do I feel tempted to blame others? All of these factors are just clearly dependent on our notion of I. And as that notion of I evolves, our interpretation of our experiences, our understanding of what happens in our life also changes. So these are some of the thoughts that come to mind. So again, to the small story about the elephant god and this Mahut god, about what happened in the life of this student. We don't know how that student reacted to it. We don't know what was going on in the student's mind. We don't know how God looked at it. But this is just some of the thoughts that come after reading that story. And I would encourage you that all of us can do this as a kind of a personal practice. When we read these stories and parables that these great world teachers taught us, to not just see them as just stories. Clearly, I mean, we can understand the general moral of the story, but these stories have a much greater, much deeper message for us than simply the overall message that can come to us. So it's very worth reflecting on them, meditating on them, thinking about the story, so that a lot deeper meaning will come. And that meaning, it's not just a meaning, finding a meaning for that meaning's sake. If we are able to kind of reach the deeper levels of these great stories, we will have a direction about how I can live my own life. When things happen in my life, how can I interpret them? Which is a way an enlightened being would interpret them. And if I want to be enlightened, what is the kind of outlook I need to bring to the experiences I have in my own life? I think all this can be very, very, very helpful. In the Sufi tradition, there are many stories, and oftentimes the main subject or the principal character in many Sufi stories is one Mullah Nasruddin. And there are many of them are very funny stories. And so one great Sufi teacher said, when he saw that these Mullah Nasruddin stories have become very popular, and nowadays you can just see being circulated on WhatsApp or all these social media. And many of these stories are being passed around like jokes, and they're fun stories. But then what this Sufi teacher pointed out was, they may be funny, they might seem to be very witty, but behind many of those stories, probably most of them, is a very profound philosophical truth, a profound spiritual teaching. And so clearly, not every story may have a very deep meaning behind it, but especially the stories told by these great ones, rather than just taking them at their face value, it's very, very helpful to dive deep into it, to kind of put yourself in the mind of the different characters in that story. So not look at the story from outside, but just kind of go in and then see what insights come. And then we will learn a lot. Sometimes we might learn a lot more through these stories than through merely abstract teachings or abstract philosophy. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, we will have a guest speaker, Professor Jeffrey Long of Elizabethtown College. He will speak, and his subject will be Within You, Without You, the Inner Life and the Outer World. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of Narada Bhakti Sutra, and on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.